I'd like to thank you for the invitation. My name's Ed. I'm not a big fan of titles, so please, whether it's today or you see me when we're allowed to interact with one another in public, please, Ed is much more comfortable to me than any type of formal title. So again, thank you for having me. I wish we were able to do this in person. Many of you may not know that I've only been with the San Mateo Police Department for 5 or 6 months. And the timing of my entering into the department was not the greatest. Most chiefs in my position would like to get out and interact with the community as much as they possibly could, make those connections, build those relationships. I didn't have a huge window of opportunity to do that given the current circumstance with the health order and all of those things. So I've actually built some very unusual but strong relationships via Zoom. I have some good friends who I've actually never met in person, which is unusual. So I look forward to the day that we can do this where we can actually interact in person. In fact, I happen to be Catholic, and I went to Mass this morning, and it was in a schoolyard. And I mean, it was nice to be able to go to Mass, but it's still just a different type of feeling. And I'm looking forward to us being able to get back to some sense of normalcy from a perspective of being able to walk down the street and shake each other's hands and live that life again. Anyway, I appreciate the invitation. I thought long and hard about what type of presentation or spiel, for lack of a better term, that you'd like to hear from me, and I considered a PowerPoint or some other things, but I thought the most valuable use of our time would be a frank, honest, and open conversation. So what I'd like to do is kind of give you a perspective of where the police department's at, kind of what our reaction, what our perception of what's going on in the world when it comes to race and the actions of law enforcement, both on from a national perspective and how that impacts us locally. And then I have some, Reverend Moore, you were kind enough to forward some questions or some comments that I will try to address, and then kind of open it up for a conversation. I'm pretty much an open book. We don't have regardless of what you see on TV, we have very few secrets in the police department. We're just like any other organization. The only things we really can't talk about are some personnel issues, which do become an issue, which I'd be happy to talk about. But we're very similar when it comes to that with most organizations where what we do is we're spending public dollars, we're serving the public, and so we should be open and transparent, and we make every effort to do that. So that's kind of where I thought I'd jump off and maybe touch some little areas that people might be interested in, and then kind of open myself up to any questions, comments, or feedback that you may have. So obviously, from a law enforcement perspective, May 25th kind of changed our world significantly a little bit with the events of what happened in Minneapolis and the death of Mr. Floyd. And it was interesting. So my whole law enforcement career has been in San Mateo County. I grew up locally here. This is not my first job in San Mateo. I used to work in the city at Petrini's before it became Molly Stone's over on 42nd Avenue. I actually lived in San Mateo for several years. So I'm familiar with the community. I'm familiar with the area. I've always worked locally. So I thought I had a pretty good grasp on where we were and where we were and how we kind of existed as an organization. So it was interesting to see the reaction of especially our younger police officers when these events started to unfold in the national reaction or the I don't want to say narrative, but the interpretation of what was going on was starting to be publicized or vocalized, and how that impacted our police officers. I was especially interested to see how that would impact our younger officers. And what I noticed was there was some level of disappointment. They were disheartened. I have not spoken to anybody in my profession or our field that wasn't appalled and shocked by what we saw with the incident involving Mr. Floyd in Minnesota. I think that universally we all can condemn that act and that type of behavior. And I think that the level of disappointment and disheartedness came from a certain type of, I think pride is the wrong word, but commitment to what we do. And I think that when we see police officers act in that fashion, whether it's 1,000 miles from here or whether it's, you know, in our own city, there's a real sense of anger, frustration, disappointment by those of us in law enforcement, because you know, like every other profession, the vast majority of those who choose this path come to work every day with the best of intentions to serve their neighbors, to do the right thing, to help people, to contribute to a better life, a better quality of life within our communities. So that's what I saw initially. And, you know, and from my perspective as being somebody who has to lead an organization, that was a little bit, I had to pay attention to that, because it's hard. You feel we obviously feel that when we come to work. We got a lot of feedback from the community. Some of it was pretty critical initially. Lately, it's been very, very positive, and I'll talk about why I think that is. But you know, when you go home and you turn on the television and it's the constant news story, and that's what you do for a living, it can be exhausting, and it can wear on our staff. And my concern was I didn't want it to impact how we provide services to the people of San Mateo. And I was concerned for our police officers as individuals. I truly love and care for everybody who works in this building, and that was a concern for me. So, you know, we talked about it. We talked about it openly. I attended I try to get to most of our briefings, and you know, every shift that goes out, they kind of meet and they go over what's going on. And we had some pretty frank and open conversations. And I think what we've seen is an evolution of that feeling of disappointment, just being discouraged, to more of a feeling of determination to try to show people that, hey, we're committed to doing the right thing for the right reasons, and we're committed to a profession that we believe is an honorable one, and one that we can have a real positive and significant impact on our community. So I'm encouraged by that, and seeing that. I will tell you that there are, and again, I told you this was going to be kind of a brutally frank and direct discussion. There's police chiefs that say, hey, that would never happen here. And I would never say that. I think it's disingenuous, and I think it'd be pretty naive for us to believe or to assume that some type of tragic event could not happen in our own backyard. I think we need to be self-aware. We need to be constantly on guard, and in seeking behaviors that are indicators that could lead to something tragic down the road. So I think that I'm not going to be that police chief to say that we live in some type of utopia and that it could never happen here. However, I will say that we are very fortunate for when we put this in perspective of a national framework, we're very fortunate to, not only in San Mateo, but in our surrounding areas, to have the police departments that we have. For the most part, we have a very well-educated, fairly diverse, and I'll talk about that a little bit as far as diversity in the workplace, and committed workforce when it comes to law enforcement. It varies nationally, and I think that's part of the problem. Part of the difficulty we're having as a nation having this discussion is law enforcement is regional in nature. Sometimes it's very localized in nature, and it's hard to have that discussion because there's a sense of frustration amongst conversations that I know, especially with local police departments, that there's a lack of an awareness of what's going on nationally and how it impacts us locally. For example, I mean, the vast majority of police officers that we're hiring are college educated. They have some experience. They come from diverse backgrounds. And this is seen as a profession. We pay our law enforcement, or we pay our police officers fairly well. In other parts of the country, law enforcement is a little bit different. It's not as well paid. The criteria for hiring police officers is not what it is here in California or the Bay Area, and it's not always viewed as a profession. And sometimes it's a job that's like a transitory job that people will be a police officer for a few years until they find something better to do. So all of those components kind of contribute to the difficulty that we have in law enforcement in having this discussion, because sometimes we're not comparing apples to apples. However, I think the trap that many police departments fall into is saying exactly that. That can never happen here, and that's absolutely not true. And I think we need to start at that place, recognizing that we are all vulnerable to bias. We're all vulnerable to having folks within our ranks that do not share the commitment and dedication that everyone else does. And I think we need to be aware of that. I mean, I mentioned earlier that that I am of the Catholic faith. If anybody can relate to that, I can. The clergy within my faith, frankly, let us down. So I think that, does that mean I abandon my faith? No. Does it mean I abandon the profession and run from trying to make it a better institution? Absolutely not. So that's kind of the basic framework of where I'm coming from. Kind of an approach is how I see what's going on at a national level. I do think that there's some traps that I wish wouldn't be happening when we're talking about what we can do better, especially with race, and how on both sides, on the both extremes, that this issue is trying to be over politicized or manipulated to serve certain agendas that I think that can be a disservice to the communities of color and the people that we're really trying to serve and build those relationships with. So that's one fear, and it's on both sides. There's no the finger pointing is a little tiresome because it detracts from what we're really trying to do, and all we're really trying to do is be better. And I know that's maybe oversimplifying what this mission is, but I can't think of a better way to describe it. We just need to be better. And so that's kind of where I come from as a police chief. I think I have an advantage where I never wanted to be a police officer. I never wanted to be a police chief. I think that gives me a more global or universal perspective. However, I'm extremely proud of the folks that I work with, and not ever wanting to get into law enforcement. I come to work every day and I see people that truly have a genuine care and concern for the community, which keeps me going and recharges my batteries when I get those days where it just seems like there's no winning. So I could not be more appreciative of the people that choose to do this job. So moving forward, I'll talk about some of the issues that were presented to me beforehand, and then whether we want to talk about these or go in another direction, I'm completely willing to do whatever we'd like to do. So there was one question that says, hey, what would I like to see happen, or what would I like to what would make it better? How do we get better? That's, if I had that question, I'd be a pretty popular guy. But I think that there is a tendency to look for a final answer or some type of magic pill that doesn't exist. And that was true before we entered into this discourse about race. And this isn't the first time we've had this conversation. It seems like it's a generational thing where we arrive here every couple generations, and we need to stop that. We need to be productive, and we need this conversation to mean something. Not that there will be a final answer. If we ever become satisfied with where we're at, I believe that initiates a complacency that is extremely dangerous. And that's not, and I'm speaking to a specific issue here when we're talking about our relationships with the community, but that's across the board. When the day I look in the mirror and say that, hey, I'm completely satisfied and we're done, and we were successful, is the day that I need to step away. We need to recognize that there's no finish line, there's no end game to what we do. There will always be a need to be better. The needs, the dynamics, and the relationships within our communities, whether it applies to race, socioeconomic, demographic, across the board, there will always be an evolving need and evolving challenges that we need to evolve with and adapt with in order to serve our communities at at a level that is acceptable. And if we're not willing to continually change and continually to look in the mirror and see and have honest feedback and have a real true self-awareness, we are not going to be able to meet that standard. I will say, and I think that this is hard for people to realize, and I think if I got on a cable talk news station and said this, I'd catch all kinds of heck, but we're always going to be a step behind. And that's the nature of what we do. The needs and wants and challenges within the community are oftentimes extremely difficult to forecast and extremely difficult to be prepared for. As progressive as we like to be, and I'll talk about some of our trainings and what we do, for us to assume that we have the answers before we can understand the problems is not a productive way to proceed. So we are always going to be looking at solving problems. That's the nature of what we do. The cart can't come before the horse, and the problem will always exist before the solution. So I think that we just need to be okay with that. And we need to recognize that that we're not perfect, and that if there's a new challenge, be honest and be willing to say, whoa, this is a new challenge for us. We need to figure it out. Unfortunately, the challenge we're dealing with now is not new. The reluctance of folks over the last 3 or 4 or 5 generations in dealing with modern law enforcement, the reluctance of them to say, hey, this is a problem that we have to figure out, rather than trying to find some final answer or flip a switch to make everything better, I think has landed us where we are today. And I think that we need to look at this more of a living, breathing issue that is going to continue to breathe and live and survive. And we're always going to be need to be conscious of that and be willing to be versatile and flexible in addressing those, rather than to seek some final solution that just doesn't exist. I don't mean to be a downer on that one. That's the last negative, hopefully the last kind of negative conclusion that I throw your way. Let's see here. So a lot of questions came about training, and so there's 2 types of training in my mind. I'm a huge proponent of training. In a well-trained workforce is a motivated workforce. They're confident, they can do their job well. Is training the final answer on how to deal with this problem? No. However, it can help. Before coming to, and I'm going to talk about training. If you were law enforcement and I had this conversation, you'd all be looking at me like I was nuts when I'm going to have this little bit of a training conversation with you. When most traditional law enforcement training plans are established, they talk about how to write a report, how to do a traffic stop, how to issue a citation, how to arrest them, how to investigate a crime. All of those are extremely necessary. We need to be very competent when it comes to the technical skills within our job, just like every other profession. I totally understand that. The area that I'd like to focus on, and maybe training is the wrong word, is more of a philosophy or culture. And I think that training can be a portion of that. And I'll give you an example. Prior to coming to San Mateo, I was the police chief in the city of San Bruno, just a few minutes north of here, for about 5 or 6 years. And I did something that was kind of risky for me, because I was a fairly new chief up there, and I noticed that I noticed a level of, I guess I'll call it burnout or frustration, or just kind of like worn down within the ranks. And I said, hey, let's come up with something new, and how do we recharge batteries? How do we give people a fresh start, give them a fresh perspective? And I did some research, and one of my lieutenants was one of the people that worked for me was instrumental in helping me with this. And there's this, I was introduced to this the mindfulness concept, and I actually took a pretty big risk, because law enforcement, cops have personality. I mean, cops, I always give cops when it comes to their unique personalities, and we do have weird, unique personalities. I'll be the first to admit it. I attribute it to a lot of things. One is, it takes a special type of person to want to be a police officer. But the other is, we hire folks at a fairly young age, 24, 25 years old, and then everything they do for the next 30 years is negative. They go to one problem after the next, and even if they don't have that big, huge critical incident where, God forbid, they have to, be involved in a shooting or something like that, which most 99% of cops don't have that experience. I haven't, fortunately. It's the day-to-day negativity. Nobody calls the police and says everything's great today. So our cops are always sent to problems. It's always confrontation. And when you pile that on and you start at 24, 25 years old, and 25 years later, every day you come to work is a negative experience, because that's what our job entails. And I think that I attribute that to sometimes the personality traits of officers, but also the level of burnout and fatigue. And so we embarked on this mindfulness training, and it was a risky proposition for me. It was something that I was not familiar with. It was heavily based in the practice of meditation. And so we split our department in half. I was able to it was expensive, and it was the cops found it pretty strange, and were very reluctant to and very hesitant about participating. But we basically split our department in half, and it was a 2.5-day immersion program. It was led by a now retired police lieutenant out of Portland, Oregon, and he has a pretty neat website if you ever want to look at it. It's the Mindful Badge Initiative. I would encourage you to take a look at that. There's some neat programs that they have up there, but it was basically 2.5 days of meditation. And you can imagine, if you've ever had a conversation with a police officer or any interaction, you can imagine the funny looks I got, the comments, the reluctance of it. But I went there, and the way I approached it is I said, hey, I want you to be better police officers, but I want you to be better friends. I want you to be better spouses. I want you to be better parents. I want you to be better human beings. And I think if you have that, you'll being the better police officer is just a byproduct of that. I want to care for you as an individual, knowing that a better individual is better prepared to serve the community. So the end product of that, or it's funny. It was kind of ironic. I had to laugh. I took a lot out of it. I was completely unfamiliar with it. I still use a lot of the principles that we learned several years ago. But some of the folks who were most reluctant or hesitant to go to participate were those that benefited the most. They talked about better relationships at home. They talked about sleeping better. They talked about a better diet. And I could just see a renewed kind of freshness in that that negativity kind of lifted. Did it help everybody? And was it perfect? No, but I think that it helped more people than it didn't help. And I think when we talk about training, it's true. We need to focus on, all of our training now, we weave into all of our trainings de-escalation practices. We weave into recognizing bias. And I'll talk about bias in a minute. And bias, I may have I'm not afraid to kind of speak my mind. So I hope I don't anger anybody with my opinions on bias, but I'll explain those in a little bit. But all of those are important. But to send somebody to a de-escalation class or to a bias, to recognizing bias class, that's great. It's all well and good. However, if that's not part of the conversations every day, it's not part of interweaved into all of our training, it really is a perishable skill that kind of goes away. So I think the conversations that we have now, that I have with when I talk to our staff all the time, I talk about compassion, not just for, the one area too that I kind of feel bad in a way is, in this whole conversation of how we do policing, the victims of crimes, the crime victims have kind of been left aside here. And I understand why that is. And there are resources for them, but they're really not part of the conversation. I think we need to have a universal or a conversation that includes everyone. And I think that right now we're focusing on certain areas, and we need to open that up a little bit, open up that umbrella and listen to everybody. And it's okay to have opposing points of view. And I think that the one area that we really haven't heard from are victims of crimes, but our compassion should extend beyond victims of crimes and even those that are wearing handcuffs in the back of a police car. Why are they there? And have conversations with them. And I've seen senior, strong police officers show some compassion to people that have made mistakes. And I think they've had impacts on their lives. I really do. I know from a youth standpoint, somebody mentioned Hillcrest earlier during the Joys and Concern portion, I think it was. And, we made a conscious effort here. Hillcrest does an amazing job, and probation does a great job in dealing with our youth. But, what we've done here and I can't take credit for this because this predates me, but we've made an effort to do what we can to not send kids to the Hillcrest. For those who don't know, is kind of like a juvenile hall facility. We've made every effort to not have those kids entered into the criminal justice system. We've created a diversion program here at the police department where if we can give those, if a 15 or 16-year-old commits a minor, small level crime, that we can address without them being in front of a judge or getting into the criminal justice system, that's so much more beneficial than just getting them into a system that is hard to get out of. So we've recognized that as as kind of an important phase. But compassion, recognizing bias, de-escalation, they can't be these 1 week classes or 48-hour classes. They need to be incorporated in everything we do, and we're making a real effort to do that. I told you I was going to maybe upset you about bias. I don't believe that bias can ever be eliminated. And I think that's fine. I think that we all have bias. Hopefully it's not based on race, to be quite honest, but we're all going to have some type of bias. I think rather than working with officers to eliminate bias, I think it's important to recognize bias. I'll be the first to admit there are personality traits that I can recognize within the first 10 to 15 seconds of talking to somebody that I know that are going to annoy me, and they're going to and they might not annoy other people. And I just have to recognize that that's the case, and be aware that, hey, I can't let that perception influence how I'm going to make decisions or how I'm going to treat this individual. Some of those people are family members, So I mean, it is what it is. So I think that there's bias in all facets of our society. I think that the problem is if it's kind of like what I mentioned before, as there being no real end game. I think if we think that we're going to be able within 5 years, within 10 years, within 50 years to eliminate all bias, I think is not a realistic approach. And I'm not touched. I know that we're here to talk about the issues surrounding race, but I think that bias is bigger than that. I think we're talking about sexual orientation. I think we're talking about all kinds of other issues. Some age. We run into that a lot, whether it's feelings towards our youth or feeling towards our older communities. I mean, it's across the board that everybody has some type of bias, and I firmly believe that. And I think that that's just the human nature. And I think that what we need to do is we need to learn on how to deal with our own biases rather than to come up with this pipe dream of somehow erasing this whole problem and imagining this clean slate, which I don't know that we'll ever get to. So I hope that's not a bummer. I hope I didn't anger anybody, but I think that just from a realistic perspective, I think that's where I'm from. That's where I come from. There's some other questions here that I think that I covered a little bit with training. I'll end on this. There wasn't really a question about defunding the police, but there was a question about what we do as far as being involved in social programs or providing social services. And that's the conversation about defunding the police. I can tell you, I am not as intimidated or frightened or concerned about having this conversation about defund the police. In fact, I'm on a group countywide to look at what types of services and what types of calls police are going to, and is it appropriate? However, I think that the problem with the discussion that we're having now is that defund the police means many different things to many different people. Some all the way as far as eliminating police altogether, and then everybody has their own other ideas about what police should do and what they shouldn't do. The problem with the conversation, as I see it, is like everything else in our country today. We've chosen sides, and it's an either/or conversation. It's A or B, and I think that the answer, like always, is somewhere in the middle. I think that do I believe that we should significantly enhance our investments as a society into helping those with substance abuse issues or mental health issues, or helping families, vulnerable families? Absolutely. I think that our investments need to be much greater. Do I think that there's no place for police in that equation? No, I don't believe that either. I believe that together we're better. I think that a collaborative approach is always the best approach. I don't think, so oftentimes law enforcement is the first call, but I don't think they need to be the only call. And I think that we've done a pretty good job in our communities in working with other service providers, whether it be providing services to domestic violence victims or those suffering from substance abuse or mental health or child abuse situations, our aging populations who are either don't have the services that they need or they're being victimized. We're usually the first call for those, and I think that, and again, we're fortunate where we live. This is not the case throughout the country, but I think we're very lucky to live in an environment that we have those strong partnerships. So can there be some adjustments or tweaks? Probably. Do I know what those answers are right now? No, but I'm not afraid of having that conversation. But I do think that the only way we're going to have a productive conversation is it's not do this or do that. I think that there has to be a coming together. We have to recognize that the partnerships amongst our service providers, both at the local government level, like police and health and human services and all those, and our NGOs, our non-governmental organizations who we rely heavily on. I think we need to realize that a collaborative approach, and sometimes those already exist, and maybe they're already doing what we want them to do and we're just not aware of it, or maybe we're not leveraging them to the extent that we need to leverage them, and we can be better at doing that. So I think I know there's a million other directions to go with when we're talking about race and how we interact here. I'm not going to stand here and say that San Mateo Police Department is perfect. I don't believe there is a perfect police department, and I don't believe there ever will be. I believe once the police department stands up and says that we're perfect and we are where we need to be, that's the fatal blow, and that's when they really become vulnerable, and they're in a world of hurt. So that's where I'm at. I don't know whether that was productive or not on a Sunday morning, but I hope it resonated with some of you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.